I'm here at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where we're going to talk to some experts about how they manage the wildlife all around us. So sit back, relax, and join me on this science quest. I'm here with Gary Morse. He is the spokesperson for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And Gary, thanks so much for taking me through this and kind of showing me what you're all about.
Well, good morning, Steve.
Now, what is the FWC?
Yeah.
What are they all about?
Well, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is the state's conservation agency. We conserve fish and wildlife resources, and we are also the state's boating safety experts.
Now, when you say conserve, because a lot of people think conservation, preservation, what's the difference between something?
There's a big difference between conservation and preservation. Preservation is non-use of a wildlife resource. Conservation is wise use of that resource.
Very good. So the Fish and Wildlife Commission, this isn't a new thing. You guys have been doing this for a long time.
Right. Back in the 1940s, the legislature and the people of the state of Florida created the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission. Then the Marine Fisheries Commission came along much later, but the two agencies were combined to form the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, where both marine resources, freshwater resources, and inland resources would all be researched, managed, and enforced by one agency.
Now, when we're talking about the FWC, there's obviously a huge area that you guys cover. I mean, when people think of the Wildlife Commission, they think, oh, well, you know, they're out there keeping an eye on the hunters, but you do so much more than that, don't you?
Well, yeah. Not only do we regulate hunting, we do a lot of research, we manage wildlife, and we do enforce those laws.
Okay. Now, what kind of things are you covering when you are doing, say, management?
Yeah. Well, management would be hunting regulations, fishing regulations, and other protections for wildlife and fish.
So you've actually got people out in the field, you know, keeping track of these things.
Yeah, we have biologists doing research. They're also managing the habitat for the benefit of wildlife and fish. And then we have law enforcement officers who obviously enforce not only fish and wildlife laws, but boating safety laws as well. We also do quite a bit of public information. Our officers are out there constantly educating the public.
So it's not, I mean, the folks who are working with the Fish and Wildlife Commission, they're not just your average Joes. They've got a lot of training behind them, don't they?
Right. Our biologists are certified. They all have degrees. Our law enforcement officers are all trained and certified in law enforcement.
Now, I would imagine that a lot of what you do gets into data collection, research, that kind of stuff. How big of a part of what you do is that type of stuff?
Research and data collection is a big part of what we do. We've spent not only years and years and years in this state, but we have people who are communicating with biologists, law enforcement officers from other states, making sure that we're trading information and the flow of information is national and not just within the state. When you're talking about species that occur in across North America, like coyotes or bears or largemouth bass or deer, our biologists and our law enforcement officers are continually exchanging information with other universities, other state wildlife agencies. We have about 2,500 to 3,000 employees throughout the state, and they're highly trained, and it's a big job. It's a really big job, but we have a lot of help. Our biologists and our law enforcement people are always in contact with the many resources that we have available, which includes other state wildlife agencies, universities, and other experts throughout the country. So though we manage, research, and enforce the laws here in Florida, we are in regular contact with all those other experts.
It's a huge network.
It's a huge network. Huge network of biologists and law enforcement officers whose passion is wildlife conservation.
There's really a lot that goes into all of, just conserving you know, managing this wildlife that we take advantage of so often.
Yeah, there is an awful lot of effort, and our people are proud to work for our agency.
That kind of brings me to another thought is, you know, as a resident here in Polk County, we see wildlife around us all the time. We're maybe not as developed urban, you know, as some of the other counties. We're a lot more rural. How does the FWC manage the ecosystems of rural and urban and the management of those animals?
Well, animals in rural areas tend to not give us as much of a problem because obviously they're not interacting with people. But animals in urban areas, there's a lot of urban wildlife conflict going on. And a lot of it is just learning how to know what to do and how to live with these animals. And most of it's fairly simple.
Yeah. Now, you said, you know, the rural areas aren't as affected by some of the problem issues or whatever, but we also, I mean, you had mentioned before when we were talking earlier, that you see a lot of invasive species and things like that are released from homes and from urban places.
One of the biggest problems that we have in the state are non-native species that are brought in. They can be plants or animals, but those things probably shouldn't be released into the wild or allowed to propagate. It affects not only our ecosystem, but it also affects the state's economy.
So they're fun to have as pets and decorate your yard, but not so great to put them out in the woods.
Right. These animals are fun. The pets are a great source of entertainment, but as far as releasing them in the wild, that's a bad idea.
Now, I'm seeing a lot of different things here. This is a great kind of facility that you've got here. Tell me about what we're looking at.
Okay, well, we have this 5,000 square foot exhibit here at the Florida State Fair, and it focuses on what we do. We do research, we do management, and we enforce the laws as far as conservation is concerned. Here we're focused on some research projects that we're doing. We're also focused on some endangered species and invasive species, and particularly those non-native species that gives us so many problems. We also have boating safety is a big part of what we do, so we have a boating display as well. Shorebird conservation is another one of those things that is important to us as well, and if we look behind us, we can see that we've addressed that too. There are a lot of conflicts, particularly on the beach, with nesting shorebirds and recreational users of those beaches.
Excellent. You've got a lot of really great stuff here. What do you have in store for me next?
Yeah, well, what's in store for you next is to talk to Miss Tessie Offner, one of our wildlife biologists whose expertise happens to be in reptiles and specifically the invasive tegu.
Awesome, let's go.
All righty.
Thanks. Hey, Tessie.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
Good, good. Gary Morse just sent me over here to talk to you about Tegu lizards. So what's the deal? I mean, what are they? What is the Tegu lizard?
Well, the Argentine black and white tegu is a large lizard. They grow to be about 4.5 feet long, and their black and white coloration helps them to camouflage. Now, they're omnivores, so they eat a wide variety of food here in Florida and in their native habitat as well.
So they look a little bit like, I mean, are they the size of an iguana? Are they the size of a Komodo dragon? I mean, how big are these lizards? What are we talking about?
4.5 feet. So
seriously?
Yeah, they can get quite large.
Oh my gosh, that's one big reptile. So, what is the problem with Tegu lizards? I mean, like, why do you need to track these animals?
You know, we're still doing research to find out what their impacts in Florida are, but we do know they eat a wide variety of food, including small mammals, reptiles, different amphibians. They eat eggs, birds, even insects and fruit. So you can see that not only do they eat native Florida wildlife, but they also compete with our wildlife for resources.
So Gary was talking about kind of native and non-native species. Is that these would be considered non-native?
Yeah, exactly. These are animals that are originally from South America. They were brought to Florida at some point for sale as pets, and then we're not sure how, but they either escaped or were released into the wild and have established populations.
We see, we see a lot of that, don't we? Especially like I mean, I've heard a lot of the Everglades with the pythons and the snakes. It's kind of the same scenario here with tegus.
Similar, Florida has a really mild climate, you know, and it is a popular destination for people. And so where there are people, they often bring things they like. Some of those things are not native to Florida, and yet they can survive here.
And what makes this environment so good for the tegus to survive? I mean, is it just the climate, or is it because that Florida has certain wildlife that, you know, you were saying about the food?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing to remember about invasive species is that they're oftentimes very adaptable. So tegus, for example, can take advantage of a variety of habitats in Florida, of a variety of different food sources, and sometimes being very close to people. People leave dog food out, they leave cat food out, and this can attract some unwanted attention from other animals.
Now, with these lizards becoming more and more of an issue here in Central Florida, how do you track these things?
Well, right now, what we usually do is we'll go out into the field and we'll look for signs of tegus. That can include tracks or scuff marks that they might leave behind, scale patterns or imprints left in the ground, and also, of course, just seeing the animal with your own eyes. We do some trapping efforts, so sometimes we might not see an animal ourselves. We know an animal might be in the area, we'll put a trap out and then come back, and then we have confirmation that, yes, there was an animal there. Okay. We also use wildlife cameras. We can put a camera on a game trail and see animals that cross the path.
Is there a way to manage them once you are able to locate them? Like, what do you do with them?
We're still working on developing best management strategies right now for this species. So we work with partners to try to improve our research efforts, to improve our trapping and removal efforts, and to develop management strategies for the future.
Well, let's talk about the research a little bit. What does that entail, researching these animals?
Oftentimes we want to know what they're doing when they're moving around Florida, if they are disturbing other animals out here, if they're disturbing people. But we can also collect the animals and then see what they're eating. We can find out how fast they're reproducing. And those can all help us plan ahead for what to do next for these animals.
Okay. So Tessie, I think it's time to actually take a look at one of these lizards. Can you bring one for us?
Yeah, absolutely. They're really impressive. All right, so this is an Argentine black and white tegu. And you can see that he is a really impressive large animal.
Now, what are some of the defining characteristics of this? I mean, obviously, if you see a lizard like this out there, you're going to say, "Oh, this is no gecko here." But what are some of his characteristics that makes him such a good hunter?
Well, you can see that he has a very large mouth. He has a very powerful and strong bite, and they have very unusual teeth. They're sharp and pointy in the front, and more rounded and flatter in the back, which are great for crushing their prey. They also have strong, powerful claws.
I see that. They look sharp too. They grab a hold of your shirt and rip you. Now, his tongue is interesting because it's split. What's the advantage of having a split tongue for a lizard?
Sure, most lizards don't necessarily have split tongues. Some do, and just like a snake, they can collect scent particles in the air. And they have a special organ on the roof of their mouth where they would bring that tongue inside and be able to detect a lot stronger of a scent than they otherwise would.
So that's what he's doing right now. He's checking me out.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, his tail is a very long tail. What's the purpose of the tail on the lizard?
They kind of serve two purposes. So they're good for a self-defense mechanism. They can whip them and startle a predator. But they also can drop a portion of their tail if an animal gets a hold of them, and later on regrow that tail.
So it's almost like a defense mechanism where he can distract another prey with his tail.
Yep.
Interesting. What a creature. Now his skin is interesting as well. You know, if you pick up a little gecko, it's got a very soft texture, but his texture is very different from a small lizard.
Yeah, very rough and tough skin, very bumpy, and the coloration on their body as well as the pattern on their skin there helps them to blend in with their surroundings. So they're very good at camouflage.
It's much more like a snake skin than it is what you would typically consider a lizard.
Sure, kind of more of a beaded texture there, very scaly.
Now, are they burrowing type animals, or do they usually stay above ground?
That's a really good question. Tegus are not good climbers, but one of the most impressive things about a tegu is their ability to survive colder winter. So in Florida, they will actually seek shelter underground and survive temperatures below 40 degrees.
Wow. Well, from what I understand, we have some other areas to look at and some other topics to cover, but Tessie, thank you so much for showing me the Tegu lizard. This is very interesting. Thanks so much.
Yes.
Hi, Angeline.
Hi.
I'm here with Angeline Scott, and she is the Wildlife Assistance Biologist here with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Now, Angeline, you know, Gary had said that you guys take care of a lot of different areas, and that includes managing the wildlife. What are some of the key areas that you guys kind of handle?
Well, we do handle a lot of nuisance wildlife issues, and I think we're seeing that happen, or we're getting more and more complaints about that as our population expands. Many wildlife populations are recovering, and as the humans expand too, along with the wildlife, there's opportunity for conflict, and we're seeing that.
Well, Angeline, from what I understand, one of the big issues around here are bats, especially in Polk County, because we have a lot of, you know, wooded area, a lot of rural areas. Why are bats such a problem?
Well, bats can be a problem when they get into structures, particularly buildings like businesses or residences. Bats on themselves really aren't a problem if they're not in structures. There's a lot of good things that bats do for the community, like eating insects. All of our bats in Florida are strictly insectivorous, meaning they eat insects.
Insectivorous,
yeah,
I like that.
Yeah, and they actually provide a really good resource to agriculture. They can help agriculture to the tunes of billions of dollars a year with the amount of insects that they eat. So it's incredible how much they can do for us.
Wow.
And of course, Floridians, we don't like that many insects, so the bats help us out a lot too. But when they get into structures, it can be conflicting. Nobody wants bats inside of a structure, and neither do we. Common places are in attics or in soffits. Our bats in Florida are pretty small, so they can get into openings the size of your thumb in a building.
That's tiny. I would never imagine a bat whose wingspan is, you know, yay big, that they can get into something that
Yeah,
big.
that small, they can fit inside of in a structure. So we do allow exclusions for bats that are in structures. An exclusion is just a nice way of saying you're evicting the bats.
Okay.
That way, no one has to handle the bats. No one actually crawls up there and grabs the bats and pulls them out or relocates them. They actually put a device up on the structure that allows the bats to exit, but does not allow them to re-enter again. And that forces the bats to go somewhere else and roost somewhere differently.
Now, are the bats, I mean, is it just that people don't like them in the structures, or are there actual concerns, health concerns, or anything like that?
There are some health concerns. Bats can certainly carry rabies, but it's a very small percentage. We're talking less than half of 1% of bats that carry rabies.
So it's more just, there's a critter in my ceiling.
Yeah, and there's one species of bat in particular called the Brazilian freetail. They're a little stinky, so they can be a little smelly sometimes. A lot of folks think it's the guano from the bat that smells, but it's actually the bat itself. They have oil secretions on them, and so when they're coming and going, it can get a little stinky when the Brazilian freetails are around.
Yeah. Now, bats aren't the only issue. There are lots of other animals that crawl on the ground. What are some of the other ones that you guys run into on a regular basis?
Sure. So I think one of our top species we get complaints about are coyotes.
Coyotes.
Yeah.
It's not just a California problem anymore, is it?
No. We hear a lot about coyotes, especially in Polk County. They've been in the news recently. I think a lot of folks don't expect them to be in urban areas, but that's where we're finding them.
Why are coyotes such an issue?
They're an issue because they don't think most Floridians are used to them. Coyotes are fairly new to Florida. They started moving into the state in the 60s. They went through a natural range expansion, so they moved from the western U.S. to the eastern U.S. They've been in Polk County for about 30 years or so, but as their populations expand and grow, they're starting to push into more urban areas. And I don't think most Floridians expect that. I don't think they expect to see coyotes.
What is the danger of having coyotes in an urban neighborhood?
So coyotes themselves inherently aren't dangerous, but they will go after pets, and that's probably the biggest issue. Free-ranging cats are of course open to predation, not only from coyotes, but from other wildlife. There's other things in Florida that will eat cats. And sometimes small dogs can be predated upon as well. But there are some precautions that pet owners can take to prevent this. An easy one is to keep cats inside. If they're inside, they won't be predated upon by coyotes or other wildlife. Dogs, and we're talking small dogs here, we're talking about 20 pounds or under. As long as dogs are with a person, they're on a short leash or in a well-fenced-in yard, they shouldn't have a problem with coyotes. Coyotes are all about opportunity. They're very smart. And so typically when we hear of dogs being taken, it's when they're not on a leash or they're not with a person. They're out by themselves, and coyotes will take advantage of that. Now,
coyotes are part of the canine family,
That's
right? How does somebody distinguish whether or not it's somebody's dog on the loose or coyote? What makes them, you know, what defines a coyote?
What defines a coyote? That's a good question. So coyotes in Florida are about the size of a mid-sized dog. They're about 28 pounds is the average. Their coloration can be variable. It can be sable, it can look more brindle, or they can be almost black. I think one of the easiest things for folks to look for is to see if there's a collar. Okay. If there's a collar, then that would be a dog. If there's not a collar, then there is potential for it to be a coyote. They're long-legged, they tend to be tall, they're lean, and they're also fairly wary and skittish. And those are all good signs to look for.
Most dogs are more accustomed to human interaction.
Yeah, and another thing to look for too is the tail. If you think of like a husky tail, how it's furry.
Right.
Although huskies will hold it over their back, coyotes won't. They'll hold their tail out straight behind them.
Okay.
That's another good identification factor.
So it's kind of bushy then, or a
bushy, right, kind of a bushier tail.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, what are some of the things that that FWC is doing to kind of help manage this coyote population?
So the best thing that we're doing is trying to educate the public about coyotes. We know that coyotes are here to stay. There is no way to remove them all. And coyotes are playing an important role in our ecosystems. We used to have the red wolf in Florida, but the red wolf is gone. It's been extirpated. It's not here anymore.
Extirpated, what does that mean?
Extirpated means locally extinct.
Okay.
So you can't find the red wolf anymore in Florida for a number of reasons, but the coyote is filling that role in the ecosystem that the red wolf left. So the coyotes, for example, are eating what we call mesopredators, or small predators.
Let me ask you, which is worse, the red wolf or the coyote?
I don't think either of them are worse. I think they both have
they're both predators,
yeah,
right?
They're both predators. If the red wolf was here, the coyote likely would not be.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why coyotes are here is because of the absence of red wolves. Red wolves would have eaten coyotes and kept them out.
Okay, so they're a little bit
red wolves
fierce.
are bigger, and that's a good way to describe it.
So the coyotes, they kind of take care of the rodents and things like that as well?
Yeah, they eat rodents, they'll eat raccoons, armadillos, possums, animals that are frequently considered nuisances in urban areas. The coyotes are keeping check or keeping control of this population.
So basically, some of the things that we as humans see as nuisance problems, see these animals as invading our space, it's really, they're working within their own environment, their own kind of little ecosystem.
That's right, that's right. Coyotes are territorial. They keep other coyotes out of their territories. And in urban areas, we know that their territories will shrink to only about 3 square miles. Where in rural areas, it's about 15.
Oh, wow.
And the reason why it shrinks is because there's more food there. And if you think about urban areas, wherever there's people, there's food. There's garbage, there's roadkill, there's pet food, there's raccoons, there's rodents.
And why put more work into finding your meal than you have to?
Right. Coyotes in that aspect are very, very smart. Think of it this way. Coyotes have been persecuted for generations, just like the wolves were. But the wolves didn't survive so well. Yeah, they're still living. There's some out west. But the coyotes not only survived, but they thrived. Their range has expanded. They're now in every state in the U.S. except for Hawaii. So if you look at that from a wildlife
So if you don't want coyotes, move to Hawaii.
Well, you could move to Hawaii, or you can just take some precautions like we talked about, securing your dogs, making sure they're on a short leash, securing your cats inside, and keeping attractants out of or off of your property. Attractants can be anything: pet food, birdseed, garbage, anything that can attract a raccoon can attract a coyote. These simple steps can help keep coyotes from relying on human-related resources.
Do you find that a lot with, I mean, you said coyotes and raccoons. I mean, do you find that a lot with a lot of the nuisance animals that come in, the same practices that we can establish as humans apply to a broad spectrum?
Absolutely, absolutely. The same practices of securing pet food or securing attractants doesn't just go for coyotes. It also goes for foxes, or it can go for raccoons, or it can go for rodents. Those simple steps can reduce wildlife problems dramatically.
Yeah. Now, here in Florida, I think one of the most wonderful things about living, especially in Polk County, it seems like we just have this great array of bird species. I mean, everywhere you look, there's a different and interesting kind of bird, but that's not always a good thing to have all these birds around. What are some of the problems that we're encountering that as the Fish and Wildlife Commission that you guys see as problems here in the area?
So one of the bird species we get calls about are sandhill cranes. I do want to point out.
These sandhill cranes, what are these? The sandhill cranes are the big giant ones?
This is a 3-foot tall bird. Now this has a red cap on its head. It's kind of tan in coloration. They're usually in pairs, or sometimes they'll be 3 or 4, depending on how many kids they have with them that year. They like open prairie habitat, so golf courses is a good place to spot
these are the
them.
ones that you always see kind of just strutting their stuff on the golf course, right?
They kind of do their thing. They walk around golf courses a lot, and a lot of times too on the edges of roads is where you'll see them a lot too.
I can imagine that creates a dangerous situation.
Yes, so we do know that sandhill cranes get hit by cars frequently. I don't know what it is, they'll just walk out in the middle of the road. A lot of Polk County residents though are in tune to that and will stop and allow the cranes to cross, especially when they have young fledglings or young birds with them.
Are they unintelligent animals?
I'd say they're pretty intelligent as far as birds go. Maybe not as intelligent as coyotes, but but they're pretty smart. And I do want to point out they are a threatened species in Florida, so they have some extra protections around them because of that.
What kind of problems can these sandhill cranes cause for a homeowner?
Sure, so some problems we see with sandhill cranes is they'll start tapping on windows, or they'll start tapping on screens, or they'll cause some property damage. And this is usually due to them seeing their reflection. They can see the reflection, they think it's another bird, and they get territorial, especially the males. In this time of year, getting into the springtime, we're getting into breeding season, so the males will be a little bit more territorial than they have been in the past. But this is directly related back to food. Sandhill cranes are attracted into urban areas from feeders. Now, it is illegal to feed sandhill cranes, and this is either hand feeding or leaving out a feeder in a way that attracts sandhill cranes. And most folks, when they put out a bird feeder, aren't targeting sandhill cranes, but they're smart enough to come in and come for that food. And that's when we can see those behaviors start. They're in the urban areas, they're passing windows more, and now they're seeing their reflection. And that can be a problem.
Are they, I mean, does that mean that they're really aggressive birds? I mean, is there a danger there for people as far as approaching them?
They're not as inherently aggressive towards people. Now, sure, if you were to corner a crane, he would defend himself. But as long as you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. It's more aggressive towards another sandhill crane. And when they see their reflection, they just don't understand that it's a glass window, not a bird.
Well, glass isn't something that an animal encounters in wildlife, so it makes sense.
That's true.
Now, sandhill cranes aren't the only bird that causes problems. I've heard of people having issues with vultures.
That's right. Vultures are another one. One of the biggest issues we see with vultures is they're loafing, or they'll roost on top of a structure or sometimes cars, and they'll just hang out. We also know that sometimes vultures will start pecking or picking at sealants, like the sealant around the windows of your car, that rubber sealant there. For some reason, black vultures are real picky about that, and they'll pick at it.
They like the texture of it, maybe, or something.
We don't know.
Reminds them of dead flesh.
We don't know. We've been doing a lot of research on that. Us and our partners, our other federal agencies have, and we just don't know why they do that. So one of the best ways to curb vulture issues is to kind of nip it in the bud, let's say. So if you start seeing vultures roosting on your structure or on your car, start hazing them, scaring them away, making them know it's not comfortable for them to be there. One of the easiest ways to do this is with an air horn. Air horns are pretty cheap. Your neighbors might not like you so much, so try to do it during the day. But scaring them off and giving them a negative experience can help flush them from the area and keep them from coming back.
But don't hurt the animals.
Right, you would never want to hurt the vultures, because then if you hurt them, then you're going to have an injured vulture, and that's a whole other ball game. Plus, they're federally protected species. But you can haze them and drive them from the area.
Great. Well, Angeline, thank you so much for taking the time out to kind of share with me all of the great things that you're doing and helping us as humans and animals cohabitate.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Well, that's about all the time that we've got for today, so join me next time as we seek out yet another science quest.